Buongiorno, Lisa.
Buongiorno, Fosca.
How are you doing?
Oh, I'm well, thank you. I'm enjoying a nice summer day here in Vermont.
And it's funny because we were just talking before we started recording about the fact that I was just in Vermont with my daughter. You and I met actually right before that trip when you were in Florence. And
Hmm.
so we were talking about my upcoming New England trip and your Italy trip.
Good.
And it was actually the first time we had met in person. Even though we
That's
have
right.
known each other now, we've had a correspondence for about a year, which
Hmm.
has been really nice for me. It's been very enriching, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation today so that more people can know you and the wonderful work you do up in Vermont for the Vermont Italian Cultural Association, which we're going to hear all about today. So I just want to thank you for being here. Um,
Thank you for
and I
inviting me.
Oh, well, I'm thrilled to have you and talk about sort of your path to really where you are today. So I guess my first question would be exactly that. I mean, I know a little bit about your personal story and I hope you'll share it with us, but I thought we could also start by how you did get first involved with the Vermont Italian Cultural Association.
Sure. Well, we had moved to Vermont. It's been now 24 years, which is kind of shocking, and had no idea that there was even an Italian organization, cultural or otherwise, here in Vermont. And honestly, rather naively, didn't even understand the connection between Italy and Vermont, which runs very deep. And so I wasn't looking for anything, but as these things go, I was voting, and someone recognized my name, which I didn't change when I got married, and asked me, and I said, "Of course, yes, I am. I'm half Sicilian." And so they had said, "Have you heard about us?" And I hadn't, as I said. And I ended up joining, and that was probably 15 years ago. And also, that was at a time when my children were still young and we had so many activities going on. So it was one of those things I just kept renewing my membership, thinking that one day I will be able to do something. But I did participate as much as I could in some of the conversation groups for a period of time. And then when I retired, as these things seem to happen, your schedule opens up and it quickly gets filled with other interests and hobbies and travel. And so first it was I joined a committee, then I joined another committee, then I
Mhm.
joined another committee.
Mhm.
And after about 18 months, I joined the board and then I became president of the Vermont Italian Cultural Association. It'll be 3 years now. And I don't feel the need to really give it up at this point. I'm enjoying
You
every minute
shouldn't.
of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you shouldn't give it up.
yeah.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You said something before we sort of dive a little deeper into what the association does, because you do a lot.
Mhm.
Um, I want to just touch on something that you just said, which you said that when you first moved to Vermont, you didn't realize how deep those connections between Italy and Vermont were. Can you tell us a little more about those connections?
Sure. So a lot of Italian immigrants came to Vermont in the late 19th century, early 20th century to work in the granite and marble quarries here in Vermont. And they were actively recruited because they were skilled stonecutters,
Mhm.
draftsmen, etc., from Carrara and other parts, primarily from northern Italy, settled in a town called Barre, which is not Bari like in Puglia, but Barre in
Mhm.
here in Vermont, and also Proctor, where there are still, well, Barre still has granite quarries, but a large number of Italian immigrants came from Italy and settled in Vermont. And then what happened, as these things do, is that connections and businesses started to come to Vermont. Italians were immigrating to start businesses to support the Italian community here. So this occurred both in Barre and in Proctor and Rutland in southern Vermont, and also in Burlington. And they came to work on the railroads. They came to open, they were fruit vendors, vegetable, vendors. Then they opened stores. So soon after, a very large population developed in Burlington, which is the largest city here in Vermont. And there's actually a designation of Little Italy here in Vermont because there were so many Italians, even though it was there were multi-ethnic. The primary language spoken at the time in that community, in that neighborhood, was Italian. So there were Italian markets. There was an Italian bocce club. There's the labor hall in Barre that was built by Italian immigrants. If you go to Barre, Hope Cemetery, many of the monuments were carved by Italians. The names on the stones are Italian. You feel transported, I will say, going there. And that was a real signal to me, kind of in my role, that we had an opportunity to really remind people about the deep connection between Italy and Vermont, not simply because of people like me who came from Boston, from a very Italian family and an Italian community, and that I was seeking something, but because it was here. It was the culture was already well established here. And I felt it was my role to really, what I came up with, my little marketing tagline was "Discover Italy in Vermont," because it's really an opportunity to discover all of the what came before, what's here now, the Italians who have come and settled here since that time, opening business, farmers, pasta companies. There's a whole lot of stuff. So I could go on, but there is a very, very deep connection between Vermont and Italy. And one thing I do remember reading, there's been, historians have written about this here in Vermont, is that also, Vermont, but it's quite rural, mountainous, lots of lakes. And to the Italians, it reminded them of their home. The landscape was very reminiscent. So that was another sort of bond that's been established, I think, and that continues now between Vermont and Italy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, having literally just been there and, driving through, I think pretty much the whole state, I can attest to that. First of all, I think just the natural beauty, and driving through in the summer, and it's so lush and the temperature is different, and it's just a very pleasant place to put down roots. And I'm really glad that you already mentioned a little bit of what the association does in your mission statement and in your tagline, because you do have a history in marketing and it shows. But also, I mean, I would love to hear more about what you do sort of on the daily, because I feel the association is such an important, it's not only preserving that important history and that really tight bond between Italy and Vermont, but also what you do today to really cultivate those, to sort of keep that history alive, to forge connections, to provide also contemporary examples of that friendship and how it manifests. You also provide community opportunities for just connecting, networking, speaking in Italian. So talk to me more about even what you have planned recently, or sort of what you do most of. And
it's interesting because when I first stepped into my role, I felt like I was searching for connections, not me personally, but like, okay, how does the Vermont Italian Cultural Association get connected with the arts community or with the culinary community? And that maybe I had to do that for about 18 months. Now I'm getting calls because people know about us and they might have an Italian composer on their program, which actually just recently happened at the Lake Champlain Chamber Music Festival. I got a call from the executive director saying, we're performing Barrio's, can't remember even the name of the composition, but he said, we're going to be performing that. Would you like to be, would the Vermont Italian Cultural Association like to be a part of it? And I said, of course. So
Wonderful.
those are the sorts of things. So there are, again, one of the nice things about Vermont is our size. We don't have a large population. There's fewer than 1 million people here in the state. It's very easy to make connections, and people are very happy to partner and collaborate. So, what I have done really is I've signed up for a lot of newsletters, to sort of see what's coming up,
Yeah,
literary festivals, which a couple are coming up now, that feature authors who are Italian or Italian American who have a story, based or written about Italy. Certainly a lot of music. This is a very rich music, artistic, cultural state. Food is huge here.
absolutely.
We have, again, it's just so funny. COVID sort of provided, obviously, a new platform for us, but it sort of, obviously, it forced us to think differently about how, we go about things. And we started hosting a number of virtual events during COVID, which allowed us to broaden our reach considerably because it didn't require
Absolutely.
people to come in
Right.
person. And on one of these, I'm just giving you another example of how these connections sort of
Yeah.
fell into my lap. One of these, I had been in touch with a friend who was involved in the Slow Food Vermont, which of course
Yeah.
was started in Italy, and
Right.
Vermont was one of the first U.S. chapters, of course.
I believe
So,
that. Yeah.
so we held an event with Slow Food, and they did a presentation, and lo and behold, there are several people on the Zoom call that I've since become friends with, who, were authors and have done, taught classes on, Italian, I don't know, agriculture and farming. And so all of these, one connection begets several connections. And we have relationships with Slow Food. We have relationships with all of the universities, with Dartmouth College, where there's a large Italian department, Middlebury College, University of Vermont, film organizations, many of which will show Italian films. So what I have found, because we're an all volunteer organization and we have a lot of great volunteers, but we don't have a staff to put on events. I mean, we do some on our own, but for the most part, partnering with organizations that are in the business of running events, can
Absolutely.
publicize far more um, impactfully
Exactly.
than we can. Those are the organizations that we look to. So you asked me, what do we got? What have we got coming up? So we've got, we now have, I think 6 Italian conversation groups in the state, and
Wow.
people keep asking, oh, we'd like one in this part, we'd like one in this part. So there's a lot of interest in Italian language. We have a trip to Puglia coming up in fall of 2025. We have applying for Italian citizenship presentations. We've got a literary festival coming up. We have a book reading with Joseph Luzzi coming up, who's a
Wonderful.
professor at Yale and is
Yeah.
a well-renowned scholar. We've done a couple with him. We have opera presentations coming up. So
Wonderful.
it's almost endless. We actually have to look at it's like looking at my own personal calendar. It's like, okay, we have too many things going on
I was
this
just going
month.
to ask you, like,
We got to put something aside.
how do you do it all? I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of passion in what you do. And I think, you sort of mentioned in passing that, the way you first came into contact with the association with somebody, our telltale names, right? Like
Yes, right.
DeNatale, da Cerno, it's, um, but I wanted to touch on that because I wanted to speak a little about your identity. You mentioned, being from Boston and being Italian American, but I know also that your identity is really important to you. And you have a very special journey that you took to get Italian citizenship. And I
Mhm.
know that a lot of our listeners are either in the midst of that process or looking into it, as many I'm sure of your members are as well.
Right.
And so I would hope that maybe you could speak to us a bit about sort of your personal experience as an Italian American
Mhm.
and that pull you feel that you felt and you still feel toward sort of the motherland,
Mhm.
and also about your path to Italian citizenship.
Sure. Um, so I grew up in a Sicilian Albanian household, as you know,
Yes.
um, and both sides of my family were very um, still steeped very deeply in their cultures.
Yeah.
Um, Albania was a little harder to connect to for political reasons
Sure.
for a long period of time. Um, and but my father was so proud of his Sicilian heritage, as were my grandparents. I do know in speaking with others that their immigrant families were very quick to
Mhm.
forget or put aside, and I understand that, and as my grandparents did to an extent, but they preserved a lot, and they traveled back to Sicily frequently. My father went for the first time in 1965, um, which
Wow.
is 20 years after the war. Um, so I was always reminded of how important Sicilian heritage was to my father. He spoke about it. He talked to us. He didn't speak in Italian. He spoke in dialect more than anything else. But we also got a lot of commands in Italian, as we like to say. The imperative was used widely in our household. Um, and I grew up just with this sort of uh, feeling inside, uh, but didn't really pursue it that strongly. I did take Italian when I was in college for 2 semesters, but at the time I was also a business major, and they didn't let you, it was all that
It's
anyway.
complicated. Yeah.
It was
Complicated.
complicated.
Yeah.
But I first went to Italy when I was 21, and I just fell in love. And I don't know, I've been back to Italy, I've 40 times probably. But the connection to Sicily came about because my cousin moved back there after being born in the US. He retired in Sicily. And I went to Sicily for the first time about 10 years ago. And I remember for the first time flying in and just being overwhelmed with this feeling about this is where my grandparents came from. I was overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And from that point on, it's been a journey about sort of learning more about my ancestors, learning more culturally about Sicily and about Italy. Um, and my cousin had become an Italian citizen, and which was the first time I'd learned that I was eligible.
Yeah.
So I came back and jumped in, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know you just get so excited and you jump right in, and then you feel totally overwhelmed, and you put the big folder aside and you say, okay, I'll get to that another day. And that's pretty much what I did. After about a year, I finally dug back into it, and that was about beginning 2019, I guess it was. And fortunately, my father still had my grandparents' naturalization documents. He had his own birth certificate. He had a number of documents, which are often hard to acquire because you don't know
Absolutely.
whether you don't know whether your grandparent naturalized before
Sure.
so. And then because I had a cousin living in Sicily, or more than one cousin in Sicily, I could send them to the comune to get the
Sure.
birth
Right.
certificates, or
Right.
the marriage certificate or whatever else. So that was a big plus. So my journey was long in the sense that it took time because of the appointment scheduling and everything at the consulate. But in terms of complications, it wasn't too terribly complicated. It was pretty straightforward. So I became an Italian citizen um, about, oh gosh, it's been almost 2 years, I guess. And then I got my passport. And there's just something beautiful about holding that beautiful red passport. My daughter has since gotten her citizenship, and my brother and one of my nephews have. And I do know, and I won't go into it, but I do know that the consulates around the world are overwhelmed
I
with
know.
citizenship applications, and people are quite frustrated.
Yes.
But I don't think anybody anticipated the demand that would be unleashed
Yeah.
really
No, you're right.
over the last couple of years. They're just not
Mhm.
staffed for it,
Yeah,
and it's a process. I mean, I think that there's just and every path is different. Every one document that you can get for one family member. I mean, it's just so
I know.
complicated.
I know. I've heard a
So,
ton of stories, and also just as an FYI to our listeners, because you did bring it up, there are much longer wait times now. I have, a few different clients who are going through the process for various reasons, some because they're acquiring citizenship by marriage, others by blood. I have various scenarios, and
yeah,
there's just a backup. There's just a
yeah,
huge backlog. And so
huge.
just that's an FY, it's just an FYI,
Yeah, yeah.
to throw it out there. But Italy is always, we're still, still here.
That's right. And
So
there are certainly other ways to go
exactly,
about it, but
exactly.
the consulate route, which is what most people pursue, you can expect to wait for
Hmm.
many years at this
Right.
point.
There's quite,
I
yeah.
don't expect that will change anytime soon.
Oh, I think it's
So
actually the demand is getting greater because of
yep.
information. Frankly, in addition to, for example, associations like yours, there are groups online dedicated
Okay,
to Italian citizenship
absolutely.
and various other citizenships as well. But obviously, I follow the Italian citizenship ones,
Okay.
as I'm sure you do. And I always find it intriguing, that there are lots of stories out there, and lots of people who have,
Mm-hmm.
hypothetically
Mm-hmm.
have a right to
Have a
it.
route.
So
Right, right,
we'll
right.
see
Exactly.
how
Yep.
that plays out in,
Yep.
coming months and
But
years. But
sure.
I love, and you had written this also in your newsletter, which is also excellent, by the way. And I
Thank
read it, and I just want to say that because I prepare, painstakingly a newsletter as well, and
That's
I
right.
always wonder, does anyone read it? I mean, and I wanted you to know that I do read it. And actually, one of my questions for you, as you also know, involved almost a specific quote, because you
Hmm.
talk about that in the newsletter, sort of the moment that you had the passport in your hand,
Hmm.
how that felt. So, in addition to sort of the sense of accomplishment that I imagine you felt, just like, okay, I did all the work, and then here's my trophy.
Yeah.
On a deeper level, how did it change your relationship with Italy? You come back all the time.
Yeah.
Um, how does that feel?
It's when you travel in Italy and the first thing you have to do when you arrive at a hotel is hand someone your passport. There's something very um, uh, gratifying, I suppose, or
Yeah.
just, of connecting, that immediate connection when they see the Italian passport, they speak to you in Italian, and even if I have to say in my Italian, please slow down, I'm an American Italian, blah, blah, blah. They still speak in Italian. There's an immediate connection. And that yeah, I almost kind of wave it around wave it around a little bit when I'm at the airport, like, hey, I'm not really,
No, I know.
and I get
It's
to
the
go through
stories.
the EU I get to go through the
Yeah.
EU line and all that. But for me, it's primarily just that sense. I remember I wrote something when I first got my passport in a previous Il Messaggio, and I said something about my eyes are no longer blue, they're azzurri,
Right.
and just all of those things that I look at, it's like, wow, this is really who I am. This is really who I am.
Yeah.
And my father sadly had died just before I got my passport. So when I did, I was in Boston and I went to the cemetery and
Oh,
I stood over his grave and knowing how proud he would have been, how happy he would have been because he had been with me on part of the journey, and I know it would have been something that it would given him a great deal of happiness. But
yeah,
yeah, I think it's just holding that passport. Although I do say the other thing is now I have to travel with two passports,
I
which gives
know.
me twice,
So
twice the chance of losing a passport.
I know.
But
I don't I actually I think I mentioned I don't have citizenship.
yeah,
I
no, I
have
know,
permanent
right.
resident status, and it's just me being silly because I don't have the time to get the document. I mean, I know what I
Yeah,
need to do. I
do
just
right.
can't, but I just keep but recently having traveled with Jada, who does have two, who does not, if she's traveling with me, she just sees no need to hold her passports, even though she
That's
have two
right.
and I have one. So that made me responsible
I
for
was looking for
three,
three.
which, didn't make me feel very, happy. But you touched on so many things in this sort of this last comment on the passport and sort of your identity upon really, becoming a full-fledged Italian citizen. And I wonder sort of a couple of things come to mind. One is I really want to talk about the relationship you currently have with Italy, because I sort of mentioned that you were here and I know that you're coming back, but I want to talk a little bit about those trips to Italy and your pursuit of the language and how
Mhm,
you have this really beautiful approach to the culture, because you talk about every part of it, and I don't think it's just because you're the president of the Vermont Italian, Cultural Association. I really do think it's who Lisa is. And you speak about everything from, the food in Italy to writers to musicians to composers, right? And
mhm.
you really want to sort of breathe every aspect of the culture. So, two questions. One is, tell me more a little bit about those trips that you take and sort of what your hopes are when you take them, sort of what
Mhm,
goals you have, or, for yourself, or whatever, but the ideas you
mhm,
have. And then the other question is, do you have favorites, like a favorite place, a favorite food, a favorite word, a favorite gelato flavor,
mhm,
all that good stuff. So, two questions.
mhm. So, gosh, if I can remember the first question. Um, so my trips. So as I said, I started my first trip to Italy was when I was 21 years old, and that was 40 plus years ago, I think. And Italy was quite different
Oh,
back
yeah.
then. Um, and we traveled by train. My friend and I, we went, of course, we were in Florence, Rome, and Venice. Um, and um, it was authentic Italy then. It was just, there were very few people who spoke English. In fact, I still remember many of the phrases that were spoken to me at that time. Um, and because you had to converse in Italian. And so it was sort of that, perhaps that moment that I recognized that I felt the true Italy, the real Italy.
Yeah.
And I would say, I mean, obviously it's changed over time, as every place has changed over time. But I think when I go back, I continue to search for that experience, continue to try to find those moments, those interactions, those places where I feel like I am not a tourist. And while I am a tourist, but where I can be more, feel more of a connection to the people,
Yeah.
the place, the food, the culture, music, whatever it is. So over time, and because I've been fortunate both through work and just personally to travel to Italy quite a bit, I pretty much eschew the major cities now, other
Yeah.
than to have to fly in and out of. And I just look for, just some place that maybe no one's talked about, or obviously they have, but um, so over time, the places I've gone to are less. less, they're not on the big tourist
Yeah.
map mostly.
Yeah.
I went, I mean, you asked me one of my favorite places. I'm partial to the sea. Fortunately, Italy has a lot of it.
A lot of it,
Uh,
yeah, I'm partial
a
to
lot
this.
of it, but
Yeah.
but I also the Dolomiti and everything
Oh,
else are beautiful, and I love those areas too. But I do find that when I go, I always try to have at least one seaside visit.
yeah.
So rather than going to Amalfi or Positano or someplace else, I go someplace else where if I need to get there or feel the need to go to Amalfi, I can get there. But I'm going to stay in a town where, maybe there isn't a ferry service. Maybe I have to take a bus to get to the ferry. That for me is a good indication that there aren't a lot of tourists
Yeah.
coming when there isn't a ferry,
Yeah. Hmm.
or there are fewer ferries running. They're not running
Exactly.
every 20
Exactly.
minutes. But one of my favorite places that I went to, actually, it was during COVID, which was one of the best times to travel,
Yeah.
was I went to Procida,
Oh,
which
yeah.
I just adored. And possibly because it was during COVID, or, there were people traveling, but it just, there were a few of us at the hotel. They were Italian travelers. We spoke Italian. I mean, I just walked through the town. I spoke to the merchants in the shops. So that for me is how I like to travel now. And I do understand that, for people who are going for the first time, of course you want to see, or the second or third time, you want to go to Florence. You have to see Florence, you have to see Venice.
Right.
But I for me now, um, it's more important that when I go, it's less about seeing and more about feeling, and connecting. Um, and went last year. I'd been kind of avoiding Cinque Terre because it was on everybody's,
Yeah.
must see list, and it's stunning.
Yeah.
But I decided to stay in Corniglia, which it's 380 some odd steps up to the town, and very few people really want to
Yeah.
make that trip.
Yeah.
So that I decided to stay there because I knew it probably had, it was not as overwhelmed
Yeah.
with tourists as
Hmm.
the other areas were.
Right.
And it's lovely. And it was lovely, as were the other towns. And I did the hiking, but I got out early in the morning. And
Right.
so I have lots of favorite places. Lots of stracciatella is still my favorite gelato. Um, I still have my grandmother's, I have many of my grandmother's recipes, but I still make the Regina biscotti from Sicily with the sesame seeds. Those are some of my favorite cookies.
Nice. Comfort
Um,
food. Comfort food.
Comfort food, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, earlier I was talking about some of our activities, but we have a couple who has moved here, Giacomo Vascotto and his wife Jenny, who were trained chefs. He's from Emilia Romagna. They started a pasta business and a
Wonderful.
farm to table business here in Vermont. And during the winter months, they lead virtual cooking classes. So I also love to learn how to make new pasta too, because
That's
I
great.
have the ones I can make a gnocchi pretty easily, but some of the others I struggle with. So
Hard. It's fresh pasta is
yeah,
hard. Fresh
it
pasta
is hard.
is no easy feat. I'll admit
No,
I've done it very few times in my life. And it's not, I don't know. I don't know why, because I
I,
cook a lot and I love to cook, but for some reason
yeah,
it's always intimidated me. But
sure.
but there are so many things that you said that that really sort of hit home with me. And one of them was sort of um even a simple choice that you made when going to the Cinque Terre, which I usually tell clients, um, yeah, go spend a day, but don't spend more than that there because it is so overrun with tourists, unfortunately, because it's beautiful,
Yeah,
but
right.
there are places you can go to. These are my little insider secrets, which you also have, um, that will really give you the authentic Italy, which unfortunately is slipping away. And
Mm-hmm.
I say that we're recording this at the end of the summer, and it's been a summer of backlash against tourists, sort of all over
Sure.
Europe. But something that keeps coming up on social media, my daughter, is on TikTok and stuff, and
Hmm.
uh, has been telling me that, people complain because they go to a place like the Amalfi Coast and they say, well, nobody told you. Nobody told me that there were so many
Mm.
steps, or nobody told me that there were, that the ferries were, you have to wait for a
Yeah.
ferry under, it's 100 degrees. So
Degrees, right.
that disconnect, right, between the real Italy and what's depicted, um,
Hmm.
on social media. And so it does still exist. And they're actually, it's funny because Luke and I were just looking yesterday at planning a trip. I don't know when, but hopefully within the next year, we were looking at Abruzzo and Le Marche
Hmm.
for a sea, for
Yeah.
a nice sort of a beach vacation. Uh,
Hmm.
it's much less, I mean, you're in the middle of a
Yes.
national park and
Hmm.
it's not touristy,
And
or maybe just
right,
Italian tourists, much less expensive, et cetera. But I love
right.
the fact that you actively seek out these challenges, right? Because you want those authentic interactions. You want, and I like the fact that this is also, even though I've stayed here, it's something that I realize I'm continually looking for as well. I used to live my life much more in Italian. I only lived my life in Italian, and
Hmm.
even in a city
Yeah.
like Florence. Um, and now it's just not the case anymore. And
Hmm.
it's not, it's strange to me, when I stop and think about it. And I think, well, my experience, but I'm not talking about like centuries ago either. I'm talking even
Right.
about when my daughter was young. And now it's so drastically different.
Yeah.
Um, and so, but it is nice that you underscore the fact that those who really are, and a lot of my clients are like you, and they want to
Hmm.
go and have real experiences with Italians and learn the culture and
Hmm.
deepen their knowledge of the language and learn to make pasta from, a local cook, or take a cooking class where, there are also
Right.
Italians there,
Yes.
and so you've touched on, I think, some important points and also some challenges, but also why the work, if we want to get back for a second, as we're coming to the end of our conversation, which like literally flew by. But also why I think the work you do is so important, because in addition to what we've already talked about, which is, the sort of the community, the immense sort of opportunities for socializing, networking, learning, engaging. You've also, you're elevating Italian culture, um, which is something that I also try to do. So the real Italian culture, not what we're seeing, which unfortunately has become the dominant thing, Lisa. And
That
it's
right,
something
right.
that, that I, and I'm sure you also, we have to sort of fight against every day. And it's sort of an interesting moment. You were saying before, like people are seeking you out now. Italy is hot for whatever reason.
Yep. Yep.
Everyone loves Italy. Everyone has this idea of the dolce vita.
Sure.
And, and then you miss a lot if you just stay on that surface level,
Surface.
right?
Right.
And I'm so
Right.
glad that you are, with everything you're doing, bringing people, a much more profound understanding of what the country and the culture are really like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think, I know this, that we've also got a great relationship with the Italian consulate in Boston, and the consul general, and so I've also have, through them and through working with them, have also appreciated what they're trying to do as well. I mean, that's part of their part of their role
Absolutely.
as a consulate. Um, and so what can I do here in Vermont with them to elevate Italian culture? And we've done a few things. I mentioned at the very beginning, that there's the labor hall that was built by Italian immigrants in the early 19th century,
Yeah.
and the socialists and the anarchists. And we had a lecture about the anarchists of Barre, who were Italian. So it was the beginning of the labor movement and things like that. So it was, for me, it was something that I was learning, and I thought other people would be interested in it. But again, when you think about it, um, the contributions of Italians um, in the US, or around the world for that matter, but specifically in the US or in Vermont, um, are based on the values that they brought with them. And I think getting back to authentic Italy is getting back to the values of Italians. And that's why I also think that, food is such an important part of Vermont, and local food production, and knowing your farmers. And that's very, very similar to
Very
Italy.
Italian.
And that's right. And so we have several Italians in Vermont who are doing just that. So for me, when I think about my role in the Vermont Italian Cultural Association, it really is about kind of, again, thinking about what are those values: beauty,
Yeah.
music, opera, art, all these things. That's more than just going to Italy. And of course, that's something I'll always continue to do. But you can, if you think about those values and think about your travel, if that's what you want to find, there are places where you can still find it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I guess that's what sort of I follow that when I think about where I'm going next. Um, and I'm lucky now. I have a daughter who lives and works there, so I get to, travel
Yay.
to see her, which will be exciting. And she lives on, as she lives on Lago di Como, but in a town that, people
Exactly.
pass by. They get
Exactly.
on the train and they go from, they
That's
think
right.
like, oh, okay, I'm just going to keep going. And it's a
Yeah.
lovely, a lovely little seaside, uh, lakeside
Yeah,
town,
which is beautiful. I mean, I don't want
which
to,
is beautiful.
but
Yeah.
she's really in a very special and very particular place. Well, I can't thank you enough for this conversation. I always love talking to you, and you know that you have an open invitation here in Florence.
Thank you.
I also hope to make it back to Vermont and have hopefully more time, not be on a college tour, and have the time to actually sit down with you, and actually have some of the delicious Vermont food about which we
Absolutely.
and you know that
Absolutely.
I'm always happy to do anything for the association or with the association. I feel that what you do, what you put out there is just so valuable. And for me as an Italian American, um, it's been a great resource. And
Oh,
so
good.
I'll share all of your information where people can sign up for the newsletter and find out about your events. So we'll post all of that in
Okay.
the show notes.
Wonderful. Thank
And
you.
I hope you'll come back and talk to us about your next adventure or
Sure. I would love
whatever
to.
else
I
happens.
love spending time with you, Fosca. So
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you for everything.
thank
And
you.
just thanks for being such a great guest and a friend and a a great, I don't know, spokesperson for Italy
Oh,
in
thanks.
Vermont
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
beyond.
And beyond.
Grazie mille.
Thanks. Grazie.